Well, I'm pleased to be joined by Simon Pitkeathley, who has a variety of job titles and roles to perform, not least being on the London LEP, Local Economic Partnership, but also chairs the Camden Unlimited. Is that right, Camden Unlimited, Simon?
Well, I'm the Chief Exec of Camden Town Unlimited.
That's
they
it.
are. Yeah.
And also Euston Business Improvement
And Euston
District.
Town. Yeah, they're both business
Camden
Giving. Yeah.
So you're a busy person.
I like to do a lot of things. Yeah, Camden High Line is another one of the things that we do.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to tell us a little bit about that at some stage. But thanks for joining Downtown in Business London. Really appreciate it. So you do a lot of work. I visited you a couple of times up there in Camden. It's a very vibrant area. How is it reacting to the current situation?
Well, as you can imagine, it's a lot quieter than normal. Or the police were just telling me this morning it's still busy compared to other parts of London, apparently. Camden High Street is like any high street. It was going through a revolution in many ways that might have taken 5 to 10 years. It's about to go through that revolution in 5 to 10 months. So I do think we're looking at quite profound change. We could talk more about that, but I think it's a really interesting time.
Yeah, let's come back to that. And what about London itself? You have a role to play centrally, as it were, in terms of the LEP in London. How do you think the city's bearing up?
Well, I mean, the stuff that we're doing with the mayor is obviously all about business resilience. How do we survive in this current climate? The basics are the same as everywhere, really. Businesses that have got cash and can flex their overheads are going to survive this much better than businesses that haven't got cash and can't. So we're looking at ways in which we can change the grants programs to help those businesses in ways that it wasn't originally designed to do, to make sure that government hear the pain and the problems that businesses are having and can adapt their strategies accordingly through the mayor. So it's quite intense at the moment, actually. There's a lot of info gathering as well, just talking to people, understanding their problems. And every business, while the fundamentals are the same, there are quirks to each sector that you don't quite understand until you really get into the sort of meat of it with people.
Yeah, whether it's hospitality or retail, leisure, manufacturing, whatever it might be, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the government. What do you think of the packages that they've rolled out in regard to this crisis?
To be honest, I think they're fine. I mean, I've been impressed with the scale of them, frankly. They're not perfect, but then they're not going to be when you're reacting this quickly to something this huge. So no, I think it would be wrong to criticise them actually this time. I think they're doing well. Yeah,
and you mentioned the mayor. We might as well deal with it now. The elections have been postponed, I think, haven't they? So
they have.
Does that make a difference? Do you think, particularly?
Well, in a sense, to the voters and the taxpayers, you've got one mayor or another mayor. You still got, the funding still carries on. So I suppose it doesn't in that regard. But the mayoral terms are fixed for 4 years. Same as to the local councils that have been delayed, and so a lot of your planning and thinking is around that time frame. So to extend it changes things, so you have to adapt. But yeah, given the circumstance, you're having to adapt so much anyway. I think it's good that the mayor's not going into an election at a time like this. That's what really matters. We need clear, straightforward leadership, and he's providing that.
And excluding Sadiq Khan initially from some of the Cobra meetings, some of the crisis meetings that were being held at central government level, that was a mistake, was it? A bit of party politics coming in there unnecessarily, do you think?
Who knows whether it's party politics? I mean, some might say it's because if you let Sadiq in, you had to let Nicola in. But who knows? Who knows what was going on there? But I think it's right that he was included, and that they're getting that intel right from the horse's mouth now. I joined a meeting with Sadiq just after his first Cobra meeting, and it was clear from the look on his face that he was able to understand things as well as he was able to communicate things to that meeting. Yeah,
which is what we want. Yeah, absolutely. And just finishing off in terms of the mayoralty in central London, transport. There's been some criticism there, hasn't there, in terms of how many tube lines were running, etc., etc. What's your view on that? They've got it right now, do you think?
I think they've got it right now. I think it's a very difficult balance. You don't want to keep providing services, which, let's face it, are very expensive when people aren't using them and shouldn't be using them. But you need to get the balance right in terms of helping core essential staff get around as best they can. So, yeah, again, in a crisis like this, at this magnitude, you're not going to get all these things right straight away. The important thing is to adapt to the intel as you get it, and I think they've done that well.
Yeah, and coming on to Euston Business Improvement District, that must be quite a challenge. HS2 is a big issue. What's your view on HS2? We're getting it now, aren't we? More or
yeah, we're getting it now, and you know, again, presumably, when there's a slowdown, you want big infrastructure projects funded by the state to go ahead because it helps the economy move. You know, so I'm sure that'll happen. There's a bit of technical stuff around the company that's going to be created at the Euston end to make it more seamless or joined up in the area, and that's something we've been pushing for a while. There are 4 stations on that site effectively, or there will be. There's the HS2 site, the existing Network Rail site, the TfL stations, and then there's also potentially the Crossrail 2 station, which is also important to London. So we've been advocating a 4-station solution there. Don't build these things piecemeal and stick them together after the fact. See it as a one regeneration area regeneration project that has 4 parts to it, and do it in one go. So we go through the pain once rather than multiple times. So hopefully the new company will help do that, but we're still to see the detail of it.
Yeah, I've been travelling through Euston for many years now. I quite enjoy it actually, but it's quite a challenging area, isn't it? It's quite a mix of large companies, but also lots of micro businesses, small retailers, small restaurants, etc. It's a challenging area, is it?
Yeah, I mean, it's like anywhere like that. I mean, one of the challenges for the Business Improvement District is to help people understand it's not just a station. This is actually a town centre.
Yeah,
it's got multiple parts to it, and as you say, it's quite complex, from very big footplate offices to the tiny traders on Drummond Street doing Southeast Asian food. And we've done a lot of work with the Drummond Street community to try and keep that part. You know, that's a really nice, interesting part of London in terms of its food offer. It's quite unusual, in fact, much better than Brick Lane, by the way. You know, it kind of needs to survive through these changes. If you knock down 2 big hotels at the end of the road, which they've done, that's going to have a massive impact on those sorts of businesses. So how can we do stuff to help it maintain some sort of footfall? We've created walks through down there. We've created a thing called the Euston Green Link to link Euston Station up to Regent's Park through Drummond Street. Right. As a way of trying to keep that contact and footfall going, so that those businesses survive the interim period, but also that's an integrated part of the final station that beds it more into the community rather than it being a kind of walled site that doesn't integrate with its surroundings. And
so you were always a supporter of HS2. You're pleased to see it come on stream.
I would say that pragmatic, agnostic is how I describe myself. Look, this stuff is, you know, good for us all. You know, we have we lost you there, Simon?
No,
I've got Chris on my screen now.
Have you got me now?
Keep going.
Yeah.
I mean, so what was I saying? Yeah, so I mean, as far as Euston's concerned, yes, an agnostic pragmatist, I think is how I describe myself. But big infrastructure projects are important for lots of reasons, and now probably more than ever.
And you've, in some respects, specialised in high streets. That's how I came to know you quite well, by visiting Camden and seeing what you were doing up there. Not just about high streets, all the other work around helping businesses start up, fledgling businesses. There's some really interesting stuff around that. Just give us an overview of what you've been doing in Camden in terms of business support, and it's a bit of an alternative approach, really, I think.
Yeah, I think we set up a thing called Camden Collective about 10 years ago, and that's had 18 different meanwhile use spaces over that 10 years. And we probably had 2,500 people that we supported in that journey. And what we fundamentally do is find any space we can get our hands on, and we give away the majority of it for free. And we're looking for people with sort of lower levels of social capital who've got great business ideas and enthusiasm, and give them a space, but also a network of other people in the same boat. People apply, we select them, and if they're successful, then they have to abide by 3 very important rules. The first of which is don't be an arse, which people always think is a joke, but actually it's about understanding you're part of a community, and we're doing this on a shoestring. We need people to get with the program. Give us 2 hours a month of your time, ideally stuff that will help the rest of the community, the business community that's in the space. And thirdly, quarterly reviews. Sit down with us, let's see your numbers, let's see what you're doing, and hopefully that gives us opportunities to intervene and help people in that way. And really what we're trying to do is give people who are not sort of typical WeWork fodder, if you know what I mean, the opportunities to access those kind of spaces and networks. But we're also trying to sort of see the next generation of creative entrepreneurs in Camden Town. We recognise that when I was a young man, anyone could afford to kind of live and work in Camden. That's not true anymore. If you want to set up a business here, it's tricky because of the cost. So can we get that next generation of creative entrepreneurs to see Camden its home by starting them off with some free space?
It's excellent, isn't it? It keeps it more vibrant. I've seen it in action. It's
exactly, yeah.
And that leads into the next issue, Simon, really, around high streets and something that you've talked a lot about, done a lot around bids, etc. Where do you think we're going with that, taking into account coronavirus? And I know you've said to me, you pointed out, I've in the past have done a lot around business rates, saying it's not so much business rates, it's rental costs, really. But could you tell us what you think, where are high streets heading, and what can the government do, what can local authorities do?
Sure. I mean, I think the fundamental in terms of the current pandemic crisis is that what was going to happen to high streets over the next 5 to 10 years anyway, because of the land value issue and the way we shop, is now probably going to happen in 5 to 10 months. I think that it's fast tracking this change in ways that it's very difficult to properly understand or adapt to at the moment. But those fundamentals are still the same, that we shop online, we go to high streets to do more than we do to buy, and that's just going to accelerate. The problem, I think, behind all of this is that the land values, the rents that are charged, have not caught up with this change. So you've still got landowners expecting to get the kind of retail rents that they've been getting for a long time. And in my view, that sector, that process, has been heavily supported by a series of naive first-time retailers coming in the bottom end, taking on leases they can only just afford, getting by in the first year because they've had a rent-free period, and come the second year, it's not sustainable. They fall out, another one comes in. And it enables the rent levels to be sustained, but it's not a very efficient or agreeable way of doing things. It's pretty costly as well for those naive retailers that often burn through their life savings or their investors' money, only to kind of keep those rent levels where they are. Now, I think business rates, so I think, a shift there is going to be hard. It's going to hurt. Changing property values is going to hurt a lot. Whether Corona is going to achieve it, I don't know. And in London, because you've still got a supply and demand issue over property in general, we'll see. But high streets are changing. People are using them differently. Will people keep wanting to do what they've done in the past to keep those rent levels where they are? And that's also, I think, true of the office sector. Look at us. We're learning to work in office environments that aren't office environments. And that, I think, is going to have an impact on the property sector in some way. It's hard to predict. So I think that shift probably is coming, and how it happens, we don't know. And I think business rates needs to follow and understand that. Business rates are based on rents anyway in the end. It's rather an opaque system, but they are fundamentally based on the rents. So I think that rates need to follow that. But I also think that one of the changes one could make to business rates is to make the liability fall on the owner rather than the occupier. Now, one of the problems with our system is it's the business that occupies the space, that creates the jobs, that pays the taxes, that brings the life and character to the places, particularly when you're talking about retail and high streets. Yet all the benefit goes on up to the landowner. Now, I don't doubt that if the rates were levied against the owner rather than the occupier, they wouldn't ultimately end up being picked up by the occupier. That's how the world works, and owners are very good at doing that. But you bring those people into the conversation. Currently, they can register overseas, and you don't even necessarily know who these people are, and they're not incentivized to engage with places like high streets. It's much easier just to sit there and let the rent fall in, or even to leave them void if you think long term that putting something cheaper in there is going to reduce your yield over time. So I do think something like that flip of the liability would be an interesting way to sort of change the way we think about the property taxes.
And anything local authorities should be doing in terms of, do they leave it to the market, or should they intervene, or something in between?
It's hard when you don't own the land, but where I think local authorities, and it's a national government problem. It's not in local government's gift at the moment to change this. But maybe you could create special policy areas where you experimented with it. But if you could change the nature of use class, so currently retail is A1, or restaurants are A3, and offices B1, and I can't remember all the rest. And you can't, it's hard anyway to change those use classes, particularly in one direction. And often that's the landowner that's resistant to changing the use class in a way that will reduce the rental yield on a property, even though it might be better for the area that were a restaurant rather than a retail unit. But if you could imagine an environment where you gave the use class to the occupier rather than to the building, that if I'm a restaurateur and I turn up at a suitable location with my use class, and I negotiate my rent with the landlord based on that, and a subsequent user would have a different use class and a different rental value potentially, that would give more flexibility to the way buildings are used in high streets. And I think that would be a useful change. Like I say, it needs national legislation, but local authorities could maybe impose special policy areas, or, dare I say, turn a blind eye here and there, and allow the market to kind of find its feet. And I think they're going to have to do things like that in the era we find ourselves in now. And it is a different time we suddenly find ourselves in.
Yeah. And just in the last couple of minutes that we've got, Simon, tell us about Camden High Line. It follows something that's similar to in New York, does it, in terms of
Yeah, exactly the same idea. A bit of disused railway infrastructure that's up above. It's a big viaduct. We're different from New York in the sense that there's still a live train line running on the other side of the viaduct. So you'd have trains going past you. We're going to have to build a wall to separate the two. Hopefully a nice, beautiful, opaque wall so you can still see the trains trundling past you. But yeah, we want to use a piece of infrastructure to turn it into an amazing park in the sky that will allow people to walk between Kentish Town, Camden Market, effectively, and the back of King's Cross development, so that you could shop in Coldrops Yard down in King's Cross, walk up to the High Line 5 minutes away, walk down the High Line, drop into Camden Market, and then wander on up to the Roundhouse for an evening show. And in a sense, move around that bit of London in a much more pedestrian-friendly, interesting, green way than you currently can. And enabling people to think differently about how you move around that part of London. As a regeneration project, it's obviously quite interesting because it's connecting these two quite successful parts of the borough and of London in ways they're not currently connected. It creates an attraction in its own right, as it does in New York. But it's also going through some of Camden's more densely populated areas of social housing. And one of the Mayor of London's aspirations is that everyone should be within 400 metres of green space. Well, if you build the High Line there, 10,000 people suddenly get that access that they don't currently have. So it has this nice sort of build-in from the community, bottom up from the community aspect to it, as well as being an economic driver as well. And we've had 1,500 people from the local community go on walks already. You can't get up there yet. You can just walk around underneath it and see up. And 1,000 people making donations via the website. And we're getting close to be able to start the process of a competition that will allow international companies to come up with cool and interesting designs for it, get us through planning, and then we'll move on to the next stage of raising the big money to build it. So it's exciting, yeah.
And what's the length of that, and what's your role in it? You chair it, do you?
So I'm the chief exec of it, as well as that. I kind of have, lots of hats. But I think so the Business Improvement District, Camden Town Limited, is the driver of it. So it'll become an independent entity in its own right over time. But that's the beauty of a business improvement district. So you can, because my time is already paid for, the additional money that I raise goes towards the project, and the bid is the sponsor of it. And I think business improvement districts are really interesting like that, because we're elected by the business community. So we have this weird democratic legitimacy. We've got our own governance, our own finance. And if we survive the current crisis, we can seed these things and pump prime them with our own money and initiative. We can bring the enthusiasm and the governance to them in ways that local authorities or regional authorities struggle to, because they're not quite local enough, and they don't have the sort of flexibility and the fleet of footness that we do. So I think bids can be quite an interesting players in landscapes in the future, but interesting times all around.
Simon, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for joining us in downtown London Den. The first person to do it. I'm really pleased to speak to you. So thank you very much indeed.
Not at all. Thanks for your time.
Brilliant.